Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you tell me, I will do." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Our gospel is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verse 28 to 34. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplace, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." May we hear and understand today's scripture lessons and what we are learning from them. So, if last week's passage about Ruth and Naomi was about making a commitment, was about keeping promises and making a commitment to stand by one another, this week's passage is about living out the commitment and having concern for one another's welfare. These 2 women, Naomi and Ruth, they're kind of an unlikely pair as a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They live just on the edge of survival in this patriarchal culture that has at least made some provisions by saying, "Oh, next of kin should marry and take care of them." Right? There's practices like something called gleaning. Gleaning, that is where young women can follow the harvesters and take the leftovers in the field. The hard-to-reach pieces are easily left behind, so they can go along and just get whatever's left. Okay, well, you can't have the good stuff, but go ahead, help yourself. I know you can't reach it. Take it anyway. Then there's laws about the one about levirate marriage, which provides a husband from the family of the one who has died. Of course, another way to look at that, this just comes from me looking at a patriarchal society, is that the surviving relative has the right to claim both the property and the wife of the deceased man. That's actually a factor in the story of Ruth, because if you read the entire narrative, they leave out some of it in what we did, but if you read the whole thing, Boaz announces that he has acquired the property of Elimelech and his sons, as well as Ruth, the widow of one of those sons. I have acquired this, really, okay, anyway. Even so, it takes Naomi's concern and Naomi's initiative to make arrangements for Ruth's future, something other than the hand-to-mouth dependence on gleaning, going and taking the leftovers. And the fact that Naomi even has this concern is pretty significant. Now, last week, remember I called her bitter? I told her she was called bitter, Naomi. But her name, it's kind of ironic, her name actually means pleasant. It's just that most of this whole story, she has spent her time being bitter and sad. She lost her husband, she lost her sons. When she returned to her circle of friends, they started calling her Mara, which does mean bitter. So that's where that came from. But at this very moment, just as when she told her daughters-in-law to go back home so that they could take care of themselves, at this moment, Naomi actually wants to make sure that it will go well with Ruth. That connection, that commitment is taking effect. So she's able to extend herself, put someone else's welfare first, and think about Ruth's future, even though she thinks that she has no future herself. So there's some dramatic tension here. The story, like I said, even though it's been a little bit cut short, the summary of it assures us that Ruth and Boaz, the next of kin candidate for marriage and security, get together and have a child. But what is the tension? It's actually that technically there's another closer relative who has right of first refusal. Now, really, okay, here's a woman up for grabs, right? First right of refusal, that's just sad. Anyway, it has first right of refusal, but he fortunately gave up his rights, and Boaz can step in as the redeemer of the two widows. So that in itself could be a happy ending, but there's actually this other little bit more wonderful thing, which is the ending of that passage that tells us that the baby, Obed, will end up being the grandfather of David. And that's pretty impressive. So they go from hopelessness. What is hopelessness? Some people say it's lack of a future. It's feeling that you have no lack of a future. It's feeling that everything has been for naught. You might have your own definitions. But after the deaths of her husband and her sons, Naomi doesn't seem to have much hope of future for herself. And that may explain why she urged her sons' widows to go home. Go home, fashion your life. But it's Ruth that makes that stand, that commitment to stay with Naomi. Kind of a surprise. A pagan, foreign widow is the image of not to be deterred love and commitment that reminds us of God's own love for us. She's not part of the tribe. She's an outsider. I think that's just amazing. The birth of the baby, grandfather to the greatest king of Israel, represents hope for the future. Not just for Naomi, the old woman, and the daughter-in-law, but for really all of Israel. We're a little ahead of ourselves there, and yay, hope, but we have to think about it. The women have to find a way to survive. They have to work in the system they have. They have to use the tools and ability they have. They have to be the safe harbor for each other. There's probably two kinds of people in the society, the ones who live on the edge of survival and those who don't. I mean, that's a big generalization, but it's kind of what we have. Wherever we are on that probably affects our outlook on this story and our own theology and faith. How many women and children, the widow and orphan, have lived on the edge of survival through how many centuries? How many fall off the edge? How well connected are we to the day-to-day experience of women and children who struggle to survive? Some of us know some of us don't. How does this story sound when we hear it at the same time that mothers and their children are making a desperate trip from Central America, Honduras, to our southern border in an effort to survive. Are they people? Do they have names and stories like Ruth and Naomi? Or are they the faceless poor? The faceless migrants? Often women and children today are still required to live off the leftovers in the field, the gleaning or the crumbs that fall from the tables of plenty. Thinking about what that kind of desperation makes necessary, the desperation that Naomi and Ruth were both feeling, the methods they use might seem strange, but they're not unknown. You know, like, oh, let's find a relative and marry you off, right? That's a little weird, right? But still, families do tend to try to pull together and take care of each other. If we think of how marriage has represented security for women up to the last generation or two, it's not so strange. Right? Even now, women aren't treated so equally in many workplaces or schools, and sometimes aren't given the same respect or opportunities. So it's not really so unquestionable to think that Ruth and Naomi might have found itself necessary to offer themselves or let themselves be given by somebody else to someone else in order to secure their future. The theologian Brueggemann, who I sometimes have quoted before, sees that threshing floor where Ruth goes to Boaz as a place where God works mysteriously with and through human beings to make some sort of radically new future possible and imaginable, no matter how things might have looked. It kind of represents the whole future of Israel in this story about faithfulness and love and loyalty and trust. Sometimes we wonder what motivated Boaz. Why was he interested? Right? Compassion and rules, maybe, but we do have some attention that suggests that she's extraordinarily beautiful, as the happy ending suggests. But that story misses one important thing. Ruth asks Boaz why he's being so kind to her. This is later in chapter 2, 10 to 12. Boaz replies, he has heard all about Ruth's kindness and steadfast care for her mother-in-law. So it's really not insignificant that Boaz is inspired by Ruth's own goodness to do something good himself. When we give a good gift, when we do something that fulfills the faith of God in others, it inspires them as well. We always have to take a look at what kind of influence do we have just by the way we walk down the street. We have a lot of influence. In Ruth, we kind of see what it means to be part of a community of care. Even though the patriarchal bit is a little hard to swallow now and then, we see what it is. If we stretch our imaginations, we can see what it is to be created in the image of God. That means we encounter people and we care for people, even in unexpected circumstances. In the wake of the violence in Pittsburgh, we hear heartbreaking accounts of tender care from that community. For example, there was a respected physician, his name Jerry Rabinowitz. He ran to the loud noises to see if anyone needed help. He didn't run away, he ran to it. He ended up losing his life, but he extended himself for the sake of others. And lots of stories are being told about him and that, including the way he fulfilled compassionate and respectful care for people with HIV and AIDS when other people were reluctant to even work in the field. He was a person who grieved for those who had no one to mourn them. He would stand on their behalf when Kaddish was being said. And on Sunday, the entire congregation of 300 people stood to mourn him. We also might have heard of the Jewish doctor and nurse who took care of the shooter at the hospital. Almost unimaginable. that story of compassion and goodness in the midst of that. Since then, of course, we've heard of the Thousand Oaks shooting and of the sheriff's deputy sergeant who gave his life in that. And of course, all the firefighters, all the people who give of themselves in compassion and care for others. As sad and as terrifying as some of that is, all the more it helps us recognize what our veterans and service people have done across the oceans for us as well. This caring community, this determination to continue to uphold community and faith and freedom and liberty. A lot of people connect Ruth's story with our story of community in the church. She left her birth family behind. She went to a new place and a new family and a new community. And at the end, we see them gathered around her, describing her as Naomi's daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than the 7 sons. And it draws our attention to life within a community of faith. Church is often thought of as a voluntary association. They even teach that term in seminary. So anyone thinking about going to seminary, you'll have to learn that term. It's a dry one. But it does say that we choose voluntarily to respond to God's call to come together. Sometimes with even complete strangers, at least when we start out. On God's terms, to live out God's dreams the best way we can by bringing the gift of our presence and our efforts to that community. We choose each other each day. And speaking of families of choice, just to put this little in there, for example, within the gay and lesbian community, there is something called a family of choice. It's when a person has lost their birth family, a family that rejected them. And they gather around them a group of loving friends with whom to share their lives, fashioning their own new family by doing that. I watched a baptism one time, and I loved what the minister said. He was baptizing with water, of course, and he said, here, water is thicker than blood. You're part of this family of God. The church has the invitation, the call, the duty, the expectation, the delight to offer hospitality to those who haven't known hospitality in their own homes. We have a covenant of care and faithfulness to each other. We have conversations with God and with one another. We talk here about the still-speaking God, and we wonder what the still-speaking God might be telling us in all of these stories. I think we find more than a simple happy ending, because it invites us to think about God's hospitality toward the stranger and our call to fulfill and offer the same hospitality, even if we're not comfortable with it, no matter what the rules say. Ruth's story of unexpected welcome and faithfulness, her being a foreigner, her being a pagan woman, it shows a light on that generosity. And I wonder what it teaches us about the experience and the struggle of refugees, immigrants, migrants, those that have lost their homeland. And then here's the flip side. Remember how happy I was for Carolina's presence here. I wonder what wonderful and unexpected gifts the immigrants and migrants and the people that aren't here yet may be bringing to us. What kind of amazing care and loyalty will they bring to us? And then we look at the gospel text. We see Jesus' judgment on this system that took the last mite from a poor widow, all she had to live on. And Jesus notices something else. He remarks about her faithfulness, about giving all she had, about giving her gift, and compares it to the people who gave a little bit out of their abundance. Couple of lessons. Never ever feel like your gift isn't enough. I know that was a double or triple negative or something, but your gift is enough, whatever it is. Always know that. Whether it's just being here, dropping a nickel in the tray, or nothing, and just being yourself. Whether it's bringing your skills and your talents here, whether it's bringing your outreach. Let's take a look at our bigger picture. We have a lot of gifts in this room, even with just a few people today. We have a lot of gifts, and we can bring a lot of hope, and we can bring a lot of love to everyone, and that is our ultimate task, our ultimate gift. So if all you get's a penny, throw it in. But what's more important is the gift of you in our community.